Good afternoon, everyone. We are here live with you. We're going to talk about Jammu and Kashmir today. As you all know, there has been a recent development in Jammu and Kashmir. A historic bill has been passed in the Parliament of India, which essentially reorganizes Jammu and Kashmir into two union territories, the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir and Union Territory of Ladakh. This has also been done on the back of a presidential order which was ratified in the parliament, which gets rid of some of the clauses of Article 370, an article which provides some special rights to the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, why this has been done, what is the significance of this change, and also to talk about some of the history and the myths around all the narrative that goes around Jammu and Kashmir. So I'll address a few questions today which will be helpful for our audience and all the journalists and other international fraternity who always get mixed messages around Jammu and Kashmir. So the first question I want to cover is a lot of people say that the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India, there are doubts around that, it was not final, and there are lots of questions around that. So I think one thing which I want to very, very clearly articulate today is that the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India was signed by Maharaja Hari Singh, who was then in 1947 the king of the princely kingdom of Jammu and Kashmir. And on the Indian side, it was signed by the then Governor General of British India, Mountbatten, right? Now, has anybody ever done any fact check to see why and how Pakistan, yeah, why and how Pakistan has control of around 1/3 of the region of Jammu and Kashmir? Which treaty was signed by Pakistan with the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir? Which treaty was signed by Pakistan with the Governor General of India at the time on the back of India Independence Act? Is there any legal document, is there any legal entity that Pakistan has on the basis of which it controls 1/3 portion of Jammu and Kashmir? So I think once you start looking at that and researching that, you will figure out that the occupied part of the territory of Jammu and Kashmir is the one which is with Pakistan. Yeah. So I think that should sort of demystify some of these, questions, narratives, rhetoric around Jammu and Kashmir is not a legal part of India. It is, the instrument of accession exists. It's been signed. It's there. It can be shared. It can be widely, referenced, and people who are interested in history and want to know more can reference those archives based on Right to Information Act, and can get hold of these documents to it for themselves. So that's one. The second question which I want to cover today is also about Jammu and Kashmir. There is this whole discussion and there is this whole thing about there are human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. Yeah, I think I would like the entire world to again do some research on the history of Jammu and Kashmir and see how there was one community, yeah, a minority community in Jammu and Kashmir called Kashmiri Pandits, which were the Hindus of Kashmir. They were less than 2% of the population of the valley, not the entire Jammu and Kashmir state, but of the valley, who were exterminated, who were thrown out of the valley in 1990 in the name of a religious jihad, in the name of a war. And the slogans were Nizam-e-Mustafa. What does that mean? The law of Allah. In that religious jihad, in the name of that religious jihad, 500,000 minorities were thrown out of Jammu and Kashmir. And I belong to that community as well. A testimonial to the human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, if we look at the other side of human rights violations, there's often all these news clippings and there's always this propaganda that in Kashmir There's a lot of violations by the forces, by the police and the paramilitary. Now, what you need to understand is it's not a joke. There are around more than around 10 or 12 hardcore jihadi militant organizations operating in Kashmir. I'm sure there are more than 10, 12, but I'm talking about the hardcore ones. And if you go into Google and start researching Hizbul Mujahideen, yeah, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, which used to be much more militant, and later on they were sort of disenfranchised by Pakistan itself because they had a slightly different agenda which didn't suit Pakistan's deep state. So, with those kind of forces, sponsored, funded very well, armed very well by our neighboring country, by their deep state, how do you counter that? How do you maintain law and order in the state? If there is gun, if there is violence, if there are people who've been trained, who've been brainwashed in the name of jihad, in the name of religion, in the name of Wahhabism, in the name of very, very violent militant Islam, then you need forces on the ground, and you also need to protect your borders. I mean, India and Pakistan have fought wars on Jammu and Kashmir. There has been instability since 1947, and if you look at Jammu and Kashmir, as I said in my first question itself, it's the Pakistanis who sent their tribals and took control of one third of Kashmir, because before that there was a standstill agreement between Pakistan and the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, and India was not intervening at all. There were no Indian forces in Jammu and Kashmir between 15th August 1947 and October of 1947 till the instrument of accession was legally and formally signed. Yeah, so I think bearing that in mind, you have to realize when there is armed conflict, there will always be law and administration problems, and there will always be forces who would be brought in by any state, any right-minded state, to control that situation. And that's what India has been battling and fighting. Why don't people think that before 1990, from 1947 till 1990, there were no forces inside the state in Jammu and Kashmir on the Indian side? All the forces were only on the border trying to protect the line of control and the international border wherever applicable. It is because between 1947 and 1990, there was no jihadi religious movement. Off the back of the Bosnian War, off the back of what was happening in Afghanistan, a lot of these mujahideen who were out of job were sent into Kashmir, and it was all propaganda of the deep state of Pakistan. And they waged this war, they helped wage this war, brainwash people, create this narrative of minorities, or a Muslim state in India uh, being hostage under a majority. So, because the Islamic Republic of Pakistan is a religious state, it's a religious state which is pretty much being run by military for all its existence. So, I think the common people of Pakistan are wonderful people. If you see a lot of Pakistani origin British or Americans, they are wonderful people. They are really gifted, talented people. But it's the deep state and the psyche of the deep state run by the military which causes all the mayhem, right? I think bearing that in mind, we should then start comparing with human rights violations in Afghanistan. We should start comparing with human rights violations by Western forces in Syria, in Iran, Iraq. And if you start comparing with that, or even what China did in Tiananmen Square, India hasn't had any tanks in Jammu and Kashmir. India hasn't had its own fighter planes fighting its own people in Jammu and Kashmir. If you look at Pakistan, in Northwest Frontier Province, they have used jet planes against their own people, although they are Taliban, they are militant. So you can draw the reference. If there is militancy infested in some place, law and administration will take its own course. If Pakistan can use jets against its own people, if they can bomb their own people who are misguided, then India has the right to at least curb all the militancy in Jammu and Kashmir, and they've done so rightly. And I think, coming to the next question, why was this change required on Article 370? Now, this is a very important question. We should all remember this. The question here is that Article 370 gave some special provisions to the residents of Jammu and Kashmir. It would have been all well and good for a state which was peaceful, which was probably not on the border with a hostile neighbor, and where we wanted to give privileges for the development of the state. It would have been wonderful. Any state would like that kind of devolution so that they can make their own laws and can have some special provisions. The problem in Jammu and Kashmir is because there is so much of intervention from the neighboring state, because Pakistan wants to keep Jammu and Kashmir destabilized, it was acting counterproductive. There were shops being set up in Jammu and Kashmir by vested interest, by politicians and by separatists, soft separatists who were receiving their instructions and money and funding from the deep state of Pakistan, especially from the ISI sort of bucket. And they were festering trouble. They were creating a scenario in Jammu and Kashmir where they were brainwashing the youth. They were making sure there is no development. They were making sure there is hartals all the time. Their students can't go to school. There are people can't go for work on a day-to-day basis. There were hartals. There were shutdowns every Friday, every 3 days in a week. So, and there was stone pelting. They were paying people 300, 500, 700 rupees a day just to do stone pelting so that there is chaos. And then they were running these shops, political shops. They would, for their own vested interest, they would fight the parliamentary election to get elected for people like Farooq Abdullah. But he would not allow his own political party members to fight the grassroots elections, the panchayat elections. What kind of empowerment is this, the council level or the panchayat level elections, they don't want to fight. But Mr. Farooq Abdullah still wants to fight the parliamentary election so that his seat is secured and so that he gets his pays and allowances from the state of India. And at the same time, he keeps festering this soft separatist narrative as well. So in order to kill all these pseudo shops, all these, indoctrinated narratives, and to make sure there is real progress, direct progress in Jammu and Kashmir, India has had to take this step. No country would like a citizenship within a citizenship, to create this nuance of nationality within a nationality, a sub-nationality concept, because that can fester anti-nationalism as well over a period of time if it's not nurtured in the right way. So I think from that perspective, removing the articles of 370 and 35A and then reorganization of the state was important, and it has been done in the right way. Now coming to the question of, a lot of people keep asking, why are the people of Jammu and Kashmir not asked the question, the referendum question, right? The $1 million referendum question. Now, I don't want to go into the United Nations resolutions in detail, but I will give a brief overview. See, there are two United Nations resolutions, United Nations Resolution 39 and 47, which has been applicable to Jammu and Kashmir. Both of these are recommendations, they're not directives. Now, people who understand UN resolutions would very clearly understand that UN resolutions can be of two types. They can be directives or they can be recommendations. The recommendations are non-binding, directives are binding. So both resolution 39 and 47 are recommendations, they're non-binding. So that's the first point. Second point is that when these resolutions were brought into account in 47, 48, 49, there were three preconditions to the referendum. One was that Pakistan should withdraw all its forces from entire Jammu and Kashmir, including the areas they were holding. Second, India to maintain minimum number of forces so that there is law and administration. And third was the constitution of a UN body to oversee the referendum proceedings. Now, the first condition itself, and it was a first precondition, which is to Pakistan to withdraw all its forces, never happened. Pakistan never agreed to it. So in many ways, when you look at the bilateral nature or the trilateral nature of this this conflict or this problem, Pakistan itself dishonored it. And then over the years, Pakistan passed Karachi Agreement, which is their internal agreement by which they got Pakistan administered or Pakistan occupied Kashmir. They made it almost like a territory within a territory, Pakistani territory within Pakistan. And then later on, they also had another act in their parliament by which the Gilgit-Baltistan region of Jammu and Kashmir was made part of Pakistan. So Pakistan has already created constitutional reforms and amendments in the part they are controlling, and they have no business to talk about an Indian article. Article 370 is an article in the Indian constitution. Pakistan has no business to interfere with what India does with its constitution. And the last point around this is that I think we all need to understand that India is a representative democracy, just like Britain, right? Like Great Britain. If I take the example of Brexit, because that's the most talked about topic in Great Britain these days, in UK, um, there was a referendum a few years ago, and then the verdict came out, and ever since, the representatives of the democracy, the people elected a government, and that government and the opposition, they have been fighting the various possibilities, whether it's a no deal Brexit, whether it's a deal, or whether it's a whether there is any other options on the table, which includes a second referendum. All of those are being discussed in the parliament, debated in the parliament, and the parliament and the government of the day is going to take the decisions. They are empowered to take the decision. You don't go to people all the time. There is a conflict. That's the whole point of a representative democracy. Similarly, in India, there is elections which happen in the country every 5 years. A lot of parties participate in that election. Every party has a manifesto, and they make promises to the people of the country, and people then exercise their franchise and they decide who is going to come to power. And since 2014 in India, Bharatiya Janata Party (BJP) is in power, and they've had in their manifesto for many years, even before 2014, that Article 370 and 35A will be abrogated, should be abrogated. So there is no surprise here that when they come into power, this time in 2019 with a thumping majority, they introduced this bill. And the other thing is that this bill was introduced and it went through its normal process through both the houses of the parliament. First, the upper house, which is called the Rajya Sabha, and then the lower house, Lok Sabha. And in both the houses, it was passed by a thumping majority. So there was no martial law implemented to make it happen. There was no decree like you have in some of the countries, including Pakistan, where they just they've carried out 4 coups in the last 60 or 70 years and thrown the elected governments out. India doesn't do anything of that sort, and India has done nothing of that sort in Jammu and Kashmir as well. So it's been done through a constitutional process. It's followed the mechanism of what is right in a representative democracy, and therefore there is no question of injustice challenge. And lastly, to cater the question of why is there restrictions or clampdown in Jammu and Kashmir while this is being done, well, the answer lies in what I have said in the last 10-15 minutes. The problem is Jammu and Kashmir is heavily infested by militancy sponsored by Pakistan. And then the second dimension is some of the political houses running in Jammu and Kashmir also fester that soft separatism. They get a lot of incentive from the deep state of Pakistan and some of the other inimical forces to keep the pot boiling, because if they keep the pot boiling in Jammu and Kashmir, their shops keep running, right? And their shops keep running, they make a lot of money. Their kids, their children, they all study in America and UK. They have all the money to do that, while the common Jammu and Kashmir person, whether it's from Jammu, Ladakh or Kashmir, he's suffering. He doesn't have means to education. He is under a lockdown all the time. If the police doesn't want to do a lockdown, it's the stone pelters who create the situation of chaos. It's 7-8-year-old kids who are made to pelt stones. Where does that happen in the world if people are sensible? So in that kind of an environment, and when you know that if this kind of an article is brought in, this reform is brought in the constitution, there will be vested interests who would be sponsored by our good friends, neighboring friends. So as a preventative measure to ensure there's no loss of life, you have to put in restrictions, and these restrictions are not going to be forever. They are only for a period of time, a very small period of time. And I think what is most important to realize, to see, is that there has been absolutely no loss of life. There has been absolutely no disturbance. In the past also there have been curfews or Section 144 restrictions on movement of people in Jammu and Kashmir during the conflict in the last 20-30 years. But there have been times when stone pelters have come out, where people have come out and done agitations. None of that this time. That's also an indication that people are fed up. People are fed up of this false narrative, false promises, this concept of azadi in the name of a religious jihad. People want peace. People want to live together. They want to progress. They want to, they want to make use of the digital economy. They want to make use of Airbnbs. They want to make use of the tourism to the best, and make Jammu and Kashmir realize its full potential. It's a wonderful place. It's a beautiful place, and it has tremendous potential, much more than countries like Switzerland as well. But until we resolve the militancy problem, until we take the gun away, until we take this concept of a religious hegemony away, things won't change. And I think government of India, from their side at least, have made a wonderful move. I think with abrogation of this concept of state within a state, with the abrogation of 35A, which gives special rights, now the unification is much more consistent, and there will be much more benefits to the common people. There will be elections very soon in Jammu and Kashmir, both panchayat elections, which I think panchayat elections were recently held, but all the state elections will have a chief minister, we'll also have a lieutenant governor, and we'll have all the elected representatives who will run the government much more fairly, and the distribution of wealth will be much more streamlined, not restricted to the two or the three families in the region who have been basically minting all the money and not helping develop the state. Thank you.